I want to welcome everyone to this very special session, INN Days breakout session, Privacy, Digital Platforms, and the News, featuring speakers Nabihah Syed and Ramzi Eisler, both from The Markup. My name is Jeffrey Wolverton. I am INN's Network Philanthropy Director, and I'll be the INN staff support for this exciting session. What that means is please feel free to ping me anytime in the chat, and I'll be happy to assist you between now and the end of the session. Before we jump in, I do want to give a couple of housekeeping items. First off, we are recording, of course, this session to be made available for folks. Please be aware that if you are at your desk, please make sure that your microphone is on mute, or if you have to walk away, it's okay to also turn off your camera. That's perfectly acceptable. Also, there will be a Q&A session toward the end of this session. That said, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box at any time. We do not have to wait till the very end, and then we'll hopefully get to your question as we get toward the Q&A. Now it's my extreme pleasure to introduce to you one of our key speakers for this very special session, Nabihah Syed, President of The Markup. As President, Nabihah oversees The Markup strategy, growth plans, and business operations, as well as legal, communications, personnel, and other operational matters. With that, Nabihah, take it away.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeffrey. And thank you everyone for making the time to join yet another Zoom in the parade of Zooms that our lives have become over the past year and some change. It really does mean a lot that you guys are here. We have a healthy group. I was going to ask to do sort of a round robin, everyone introduce themselves, but as more people filter in, that might eat up some time. So when we get into the Q&A section, when you ask questions, please do introduce yourself, because I know for myself and for Ramzi, we would love to hear from you and hear what's interesting about our unique approach at The Markup to you. So I'm the president of The Markup. Why am I here? Why do I care about tech? What's going on? Why are you here? All reasonable questions to be asking. By background, I'm actually a media lawyer. I've spent the last decade litigating media cases, representing journalists and news organizations when they get themselves into hot water by doing things like publishing the Steele dossier, or when they have reporters who get arrested at protests, all kinds of things. And what I've seen in the last decade is the way that the distribution of news has totally changed, right? It went from, oh yeah, of course we should put all of our news on platforms like Facebook and Google. It'll only help us to be in Google News. It'll only help us to be on Facebook, on social media. And I think for many of us, we've realized that having intermediaries mediate our relationship with our audience has a number of byproducts that we maybe didn't realize, right? How do we feel about subjecting our audiences, people who support us and care about us, to data extraction done by a number of these platforms? Do people actually understand what's happening on internet platforms and how they affect democracy, how they affect their lived everyday experience? And it was out of questions like that I think the idea for The Markup really sprang forth from the mind of Julia Angwin, who's our editor-in-chief, where she said, enough people don't understand the invisible trade or the interactions that happen when we live our lives online. And that is an area that we will focus on, not as a vertical, not just like one of the many things you have to think about, but we think of tech as really a horizontal, right? Something that underpins everything we do, whether you are at an organization that focuses on education or a particular geography or something else, right? Tech affects all of our lives. And so our approach to our journalism is to really root ourselves in serving those interests, right? How do we produce journalism and tools that serve people? So with that, we'll spend the next, 40 some minutes sharing a little bit about our particular perspective of journalism as a service. But then the bulk of the time will actually be led by Ramzi, our director of product, who's here to ask you a variety of questions about how you view yourself in this sort of landscape, how you view privacy and these various considerations at the organizations that you happen to be leaders at. So with that, let's jump into a couple of slides. All right, where am I? Here I am. Hello. Hi. So in the next 45 minutes, We're going to introduce you to Markup's approach to journalism as a service. We'll share 2 brief demos of Markup tools that you all can use right now. One's called Blacklight, one's called Split Screen. And then we'll spend the time, as I mentioned, listening to you through general Q&A and through questions about how our audience approach could work for you if questions about privacy and surveillance capitalism also keep you awake at night, like it does for us and for many of us who've been sort of witnessing the weird world that we've been in for the past few years. So where do we start, right? We know that we all rely on technology. If any year was going to remind us that, 2020 definitely did that, right? So many things leapt onto screens in ways that none of us could have imagined. And so I think it prompts the question for us, is the way that technology works for us now the right architecture? And we think about that through formats that seem familiar, like news articles about, investigative journalism that are available for anyone to republish. So if this fits an audience interest that you have, please take our work, spread it widely. But we focus not only on the big tech platforms that you've heard of, right? So we're not just Facebook, Google, Amazon, but also the tech you don't know about yet, right? So one of our recent stories that I think is a great example of the Markup's work is we had a reporter investigate the ways that universities use student risk algorithms to assess who might be at risk of failing and who should be pushed into another major that perhaps is a little less challenging. What they found, shockingly, I think, was that these algorithms were suggesting and guiding Black students into different different degrees that aren't STEM. So sorry, you'll hear a small human in the background who has opinions on this article also. So universities like Texas A&M, for example, were using a student risk algorithm that would just surface to them insights saying this student, and this student, perhaps get them out of a challenging degree, but there was racial bias there. So we published this article, and in a great example of how we do our work, we published the article, Texas A&M dropped race from their student risk algorithm following our investigation. And then we held a teach-in for student journalists across the country to replicate our method and then examine their own universities. So we've been able to have impact in this sort of, teach a person to fish approach of what we're doing, which really fits our philosophy of journalism as a service. So we try to, oh, my head is shrunk for some reason that is unknown to me. Technology, we should investigate it. We invest in this very simple principle, right? People deserve to understand exactly how technology is affecting their lives, not just choices about what is Twitter amplifying today or not, but how do algorithms decide whether you're eligible to live in a particular building, or what major you should have, or how much you should be paid on a particular gig economy platform. And we build tools in order to help not only ourselves investigate it, we build tools so others can then take our tools and go on investigations of their own. And so I'm going to play a demo for you about one of our tools of that nature called Split Screen.
Hi, my name is John Keegan, and I'm an investigative data journalist here at the Markup. Since November 2020, we've been collecting a truly unique data set of what real people are seeing on their Facebook feeds as part of our Citizen Browser data collection project. We've been able to tell some really important stories using this data. But from the beginning, we really wanted to build a lens to let our readers see some of the most fascinating aspects of this data and to have it update in real time. So we built Split Screen. Split Screen lets you see how different Facebook looks to people from opposite sides. When I was at the Wall Street Journal, I created a tool called Blue Feed, Red Feed, which simulated the Facebook feeds of liberals and conservatives. But now, using our Citizen Browser data, we can go beyond this simulation. We can actually show the things that appeared on panelists' Facebook feeds. With Split Screen, we can see the news stories, news sources, hashtags, and group recommendations that were delivered to our Citizen Browser panelists. And it's not just the political world. We can also see how different the feeds look for men and women and millennials and boomers. They're all very different, but in interesting ways. In addition to showing how different the sources and stories can be for these pairings, we actually measure this difference using a meter graphic that indicates just how far apart this content is for the two groups. We're all familiar with how politically polarized Facebook can be, which is reflected in our data. But we also see a wider range of content that varies from group to group. Recipes, used car listings, jokes, and relationship quotes are all extremely popular. And a reminder that news and politics is actually a small part of what real people use the platform for daily. We have been collecting data for several months. So we also let readers go back in time to see what stories and topics were showing up in our panelists' feeds during significant events, such as the January 6th Capitol riot. New content flows from our Citizen Browser panelists into our databases daily, and Split Screen gets a refresh every day. Be sure to check back frequently to see what kinds of things are showing up in real people's Facebook feeds. Thank you.
So Split Screen is an example of the type of tools that we build and then we release to the public. So any of you can go to Split Screen at any time and poke around. We've had people use Split Screen to create stories and articles of their own based on the data that we're making available to the public. And, you know, the logic there is we all vaguely know that misinformation is a problem. If any of us weren't paying attention to it, I think January 6th of this year perhaps really underscored just how sideways misinformation can take us. But we, rather than just, you know, stepping from the realm of what we think we know to a data-oriented approach is something that requires a lot of engineering time to get at exactly how some platforms like Facebook deal with information. And so we think, if we take the time to investigate that, we'll put those tools directly in your hands. This is part of a larger approach that we call show your work. So for all of our data-driven investigations of that nature, we publish our code, we publish our data sets, we publish our investigative methodology, which we all call part of our markup method. And the idea there is that it can be reproduced by a variety of people, whether that's civil rights technologists, whether it's regulators or policymakers, academics, or other news organizations that think, hey, what you've done there is pretty interesting. For a investigation into Google that was subsequently cited in a House investigation report, we actually invented a new method of web parsing called the WebAssay. And that method's been cited in a variety of data science papers. And so we really think about how can we serve others through the work that we're doing by taking our methods, taking what we've collected, taking our effort, and really sharing it broadly. As I mentioned, we have sort of our public records oriented approach. We train other students and other people who are interested in how to use public records on how we've done our stories. We also have a recurring feature called Ask the Markup. So if you have pesky lingering questions like, should I be worried about changes that Apple is making to tracking, or, you know, what's really going on with student speech on the internet? We have answers to that. We also have things like quizzes on dark patterns. We have a weekly Twitch show. We have a variety of fora, entry points for people to learn more about the strange ecosystem that we live in. Another example of a tool that we've built is something called Blacklight. And so I will show you a demo of that too. Blacklight has been fascinating for the sheer number of other journalistic stories that it's spurred. People use Blacklight to investigate a whole variety of things beyond what the markup would ever care about. Most notably, I think, really enjoyed, there's a whole Twitter thread of folks investigating sites like PurinaDogFood.com or Purina.com for dog food, or Girl Scouts or other sites to see what they could find out about how their data was being shared without their knowledge. So let's jump into that demo.
Hello, my name is Surya Matu, and I'm a senior data engineer at The Markup. The Markup is a nonprofit newsroom that investigates how powerful institutions are using technology to change our society. I'm excited to share Blacklight with you today. Many of us know that there is an invisible trade every time we load a web page, that our data is often the primary currency on the internet. How is this data collected? Often by third-party trackers that are not always apparent on the sites that we visit. We built Blacklight as a tool that helps reveal some of the tracking technologies that are on the websites that you visit. The quantifiable results from Blacklight are impactful in a variety of ways that span ordinary consumers, academics, and newsrooms. One of our goals is to make Blacklight super easy to use, and we hope that today's demo shows just that. Blacklight can be found at themarkup.org/Blacklight. Enter the URL of the website that you want to check. We'll be using JetBlue's website as our example and click Scan Site. It can take a couple of minutes for the results to come back. We'll be using these recorded results from a scan of JetBlue in September of 2020. If you click Learn More, you'll see what Blacklight visited and scanned. Then below are the Blacklight results. If you're interested in learning more about how Blacklight works, you can click here for our methodology. In this case, Blacklight found 18 ad trackers on jetblue.com. When you click through, you'll find out more about what that means, as well as where your data is being sent. If you click here, it'll expand to include everything that Blacklight dug up. You can also click here to find out more about how we exactly define this piece of tracking technology. You'll also see that some of the results include text that helps us understand how this scanned result ranks amongst other websites. In this example, jetblue.com has 38 third-party cookies, which is more than 3, the average we found by running Blacklight on the top 80,000 most viewed websites. The next result is really interesting because it reveals technology that will continue to track you even if you're blocking tracking cookies. Canvas fingerprinting will draw an image on your browser that can be used to identify your device. Blacklight will show what is being drawn. What's important to note is that Blacklight cannot reveal the intentions of this technology being used. It can show that it exists on the site and it is sending data out, but there could be a multitude of reasons, including fraud prevention or bot detection, that it could be used for. Blacklight will also show if a website is using a session recorder, as well as where the data about how your mouse moves, clicks, and scrolls is being sent to. In this case, the script that is recording this information belongs to a company called FullStory. Again, we only know that the script is on the site. We don't know how the collected data is being used. Next is key logging. Blacklight shows that FullStory also provided a script that includes key logging, or when a website can capture what you're typing into a form even before you click submit. Blacklight will also show you exactly what fields are being captured. In this case, name, family name, and given name are being logged. Then we have 2 of the largest tech companies. Blacklight will let you know if the Facebook pixel is on the site. The Facebook pixel sends back data that Facebook can use to target ads in places like your Instagram feed. Blacklight will also let you know if a certain Google Analytics tool, remarketing audiences, is turned on. Remarketing audiences allows a website to target ads to people who've already visited as they look at other websites online. In the case of JetBlue, they do not have this feature turned on, but you can still expand and learn more about it. In this next section, Blacklight lists some of the ad tech companies that interacted with the scan site. We see some familiar names like Amazon and Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, as well as less known names like Zeta Global. You also see that Adobe is listed. Did you know that they also build and own ad tech tools? If you expand this, you'll see some of the different domains that these companies own and use in the ad tech industry. Not all websites have these tracking tools. For example, if we go to the website of the online privacy advocacy group, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, we see that they have none of the tech that Blacklight looks for. Since Blacklight launched in September, over 1 million scans have been done, with some of the results used in reporting, including some of our own, as well as helping website managers understand what types of tracking can be added onto their sites when they add features from other developers. For example, a most recent scan of JetBlue sites show that since informed of all their trackers, they've reduced the number of trackers that live on their site. We want you to run the websites that you, your friends, and your family use. If you see something worrying or interesting, you can tell us about it through this form. You can also download the data to share or use. Thanks so much for joining us for this demo. Blacklight is available now for you to use at themarkup.org/Blacklight, along with all of our stories that you.
One of my favorite things about Blacklight is when we launched it, the week after launch, we got emails from a variety of small publishers saying, we didn't realize how many trackers and third-party cookies and other things were on our site. So thank you for making it easy for us to check. And this is because the reality for many publishers is that, you hire a firm to design your website. You have someone who's using available plugins that they can find to cobble something together that works. These aren't huge operations, right? None of us are running huge operations. I always joke the markup is smaller than a 5th grade classroom, right? And so you don't always know what you're participating in or all those details. And so we wanted to build something that, yes, it helps as useful accountability journalism, but it also helps people sort of do a checkup, a privacy checkup of our own terrain to make sure that the relationship we're forging with our audiences, the way that we want to show up for them is something intentional and authentic. And so at the Markup, given our mission, of who we are and what we just want to uncover and reveal in the world, we have invested a lot of time in building a website that has no trackers, that is intentionally tracker free, meaning we don't have a Facebook pixel, we don't run Google Analytics. There's in fact a variety of things that we have to take more of a homebrew approach to building in service of our mission. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, that's good for you, Markup. That seems authentic to your mission. What does that have to do with you? And this is where I will hand it off to Ramsey, who is really pioneering building a variety of great things at the Markup that we think might be of interest to you as well.
Thank you, Nabiha, and welcome everyone. Thank you for listening. As Nabiha just mentioned, we don't have any trackers on our site, and we're very proud of that. It took a significant amount of work to achieve that, though. Because as Nabiha mentioned, much of the development work in building modern websites revolves around big tech platforms like YouTube and Google Analytics. We try our very best to work differently. In the case of YouTube video, for instance, we don't do that because YouTube sets a cookie when you do a normal embed. We have tried the privacy enhanced embed, it still had an identifier on a user's computer. So we decided to build our own video player. And that is a significant and ongoing engineering effort. Most websites also use a standard or industry standard event RSVP system. Many, if not all of them, use trackers. We decided to build our own for our events. So we have our own event RSVP system. The same thing goes for Twitter embeds. Sometimes we want to embed a tweet into a news story. But the Twitter system for doing that also contains tracking technology. You can turn it off, but the images that are hosted by Twitter can still show up, and that can be used as a kind of tracking light system. And as Nabiha mentioned, we are not using Google Analytics. We are using different open source tools, some of which already exist. Some of them we are working on developing ourselves so that we can guarantee that we are using as few trackers as possible. Again, this takes significant amounts of engineering and product and design work. We call this paying the privacy tax. And hopefully, in the long run, we're paying it so that others don't have to. Hopefully, other organizations can use our tools too. Now, I'm sure you all have many questions for us, but before we jump into that, I'd like to ask all of you a couple of important questions that will help us serve our colleagues in the nonprofit news world. And the first question is simply this. Of the tools that I've just mentioned, our custom video player, our custom RSVP system, our social media embed, our analytics systems for understanding our audiences, would any of these be useful for your news organizations? Which ones? And what questions would you want answered to know for sure? I guess you can use chat or perhaps the raise hand feature in Zoom. Thank you, Nina. Custom analytics from Jonathan. Anyone else? Especially analytics. Tech stacks, yes, thank you. Nina, to answer your question about how long has it taken, it is ongoing, but it's essentially something we've been doing since we started publishing. Yes, Lisa, we can turn this into a survey. The question of can we actually sufficiently gauge success? We believe so, yes. We are doing a number of techniques to kind of abstract private information. So it is going to be a rough estimate, but every indication we have right now indicates that that rough estimate is pretty good. Ooh, now we're talking about first-party data. For those questions, I'll point to Nabila.
Before, which I'm happy to get into, I'm also very heartened by how many folks said analytics here. I'd be curious to delve into that a little bit more. Ramsey, I don't want to derail from whatever your plans might be, but I'd be very curious. So I feel like I see Doug, Valeria, please forgive me if I've just mangled your name. As a person whose name is often mangled, I'm always very conscious of that. Jonathan, folks who are asking for analytics, I'd be curious to dig into what are the metrics that are perhaps of most value to you. And I bring that up to say, so when I took the helm of the markup and it'd been made clear to me that like we were not collecting anything, I was like, okay, so how do I know anyone is reading our work, right? Like aside from like tweets from our friends, how do I know that this is serving the mission of educating people, right? Like that, and how do I know I'm serving our funders? What do I give people? So we set out to design both a quantitative and a qualitative approach to audience measurement. And so the qualitative side involves focus groups, surveys, a variety of sort of very hands-on, almost pre-internet feeling research endeavors to understand who is our audience, right? How do we bring value to them? How does our work, our thesis of journalism as a service, how does it actually live in the wild? On the quantitative side, I will be the first one to tell you, I am a litigator. I knew nothing about what metrics people needed. And so it's been a real like self-education journey, and then working with people smarter than myself, like Ramsey, to understand what are the metrics that matter to various stakeholders, my board, funders, our reporters who want to know what the fruit of their efforts might be. But I'd love to hear from you folks, like what are the metrics that you'd want to know or want to have at the ready in a custom analytics dashboard? And feel free to toss them in the chat or chat out loud. Oh, I'm seeing some good ones already in here. All right. Visits per day, unique visitors. Ramsey, do you want to weigh in on on whether this is possible with the the effort that we're experimenting with?
Yes. So uniques are complicated, but possible. The standard way to measure uniques is just look at IP addresses. Obviously, that has some challenges. What we try to do is a number of different techniques to just say, this is not an IP address. This is a separate identifier that was built through a number of different types of other data. And that identifier goes away. It doesn't follow their users to any other sites. It just stays on our site and then it expires. We never know who actually did it. We just know a person somewhere visited the site. That has its pros and cons. The pro is it's very privacy focused. The con is sometimes that means that you end up counting people twice. So for instance, if you're using a Google Analytics system and a user's on their mobile phone, that system can set a cookie on the phone so that when they switch over from their mobile connection to their Wi-Fi, the system still knows that that's the same user. In our more privacy-focused systems, we would count that as two. So there is some noise introduced into the data, but again, we believe it's fairly manageable and minimal and worth it for the benefits we get for being able to ensure to our users that we're being as privacy-focused as we can.
I'm going to pop in if that's okay.
Please.
One of the things that's really hard, so I'm a consultant, my name's Joellen Kaiser, and I'm actually super privacy focused, but when my consulting work, I have to think about revenue and first and privacy second. And as a consultant, what you really want to be able to do is tell the story of a user journey. So you want to be able to say, oh, this user, I gave an example in chat, this user loves criminal justice stories. We know that, and they signed up for our newsletter. So then we said, we know she's really engaged. We know she really likes criminal justice stories. So when we decided to ask a bunch of our engaged users to support a criminal justice reporter, and we targeted her because we know she cares about that. And then she did donate to that. So now we know that she's a donor. She likes donating, especially around criminal justice. We had some other people like that. So we created an event around criminal justice reporting. That's the way it was as a consultant. That's how we try to develop people. And the donors, you know, are feeling like they're being seen and heard and like understood, that this is what they care about and we're giving them more of what they want. But of course, you're learning everything about someone. It's all first party data, but you want to, in order to get that first party data, you're tracking someone. I mean, the tools you're using is you're tracking what they're looking at on your website. You're tracking when they're giving you money. You're tracking when they're opening the newsletter. You're tracking all these things. You might even be tracking what they're doing on social media. And so that sometimes these people, that's first party data, but they don't realize they're being tracked like that. And I feel like it's a problem because that is the main way that nonprofits are getting revenue right now. And the systems are getting more and more complex for doing that tracking. And yet it's digging deeper and deeper into people's privacy.
Yeah, this is a thing that keeps me awake at night. But at the end of the day, I'm responsible for the financial health of the organization so we can live to publish another day. And I wouldn't say that we have an answer yet, but that's where I think the qualitative research is helpful. I think there's a couple of ways, right, to sort of square the circle. The first is, to your point, that people don't necessarily understand that this is happening. Really overt communication around, this is what we are collecting, this is why, this is what it leads to, is, I think, a helpful conversation to have with your audience. The question becomes kind of where, right? Like, who's clicking on your privacy policy? When are you communicating this to people? And I think that's where a very popular buzzword of the past few years, trust, is a really important thing to be talking about, right? So I presume that many of us message around, like, you know, our audience and our trusted relationship with them. Can we take this conversation about first party data collection into the conversation about trust? Often we see the trust conversation happening in, like, you know, this is how we dig into the news, this is how we do our investigations, or how we, you know, connect with the community. Like, we talk about trust in all these oblique ways. Can we introduce that into the conversation about data collection so it sort of fits that frame, which I think can be really aligned with sort of the mission oriented work that a lot of us are doing. I also wonder whether this is where qualitative data can do a lot for us. Now, it's not the same kind of snapshot, right? You're not going to be able to surface in such an organic way, like, oh, Sue went here, she did that, this is what she likes, okay, I got it, right? You're going to be a lot more intentional, a lot more labor intensive. But I do wonder whether, you know, it might yield an even closer relationship, the act of actually talking to someone. Now, I'm the first to tell you that it takes a lot to have those conversations, especially on lean staffs. Like, it's a lot to say qualitative data is the way forward, but I wonder whether it can produce something that is quite valuable. Again, no easy answers. I will say on the question of qualitative data, and I think earlier Jenny mentioned something about, you know, open rates and not having them. We don't have open rates on our newsletters, which have also caused me many a premature wrinkle where I'm like, are we just like putting messages in a bottle and throwing them in the ocean? Like, how do we know anyone's reading our newsletters? And in fact, it's even more pernicious than that, because if people don't open your newsletter, it starts to look like spam to Gmail filters and other email filters. And so even if someone did want to read it one day, or their newsletter habits indicate that they sit down and read a bunch of them like once a month or something, we might not be in the mix. And so we've started experimenting with surveys in our newsletters so that people can engage with us, right? And so we just ran one on Julia, our editor-in-chief's, her newsletter, which has, I think, just around 15,000 subscribers, and got about 500 responses. Now, that's not an open rate, but you can say, okay, not every single person who opened the newsletter actually filled out the survey. So you can start to use it as a rough proxy for, okay, we know that we have 500 like super fans, people who took the time to fill out a survey to give us demographic information, what they want to see more of, what's going on. In it, we actually asked people, like, would you be willing to participate in a further, more detailed focus group? And the affirmative response was frankly shocking to me, where I was like, don't you guys have things to do? Like, what's happening? This is a lot more engagement than I would have expected. And I think a lot of that is born out of this. We're doing this because we can't get it the other way, right? We can't get this information from the way that other folks get it. So help us out here. And that goes back to that trust relationship, right? If you message around it, if you talk about it, I think it can be helpful. Again, labor intensive, heavy lift, like not the easiest, but still valuable. Like there's lots of comments, messages popping in here. Oh, Joella, nice to know you use qualitative data for major donor conversations. Ooh, lots of interesting stuff here. I know we have just a few minutes left. So Ramsey, I feel like I derailed us a little bit with analytics. If you want to jump back into some of your questions.
No, I think this has been great. I think the responses have been very helpful. I'm furiously copying them all down so that we can refer to them later. I think this would be a good time to open up to a more general Q&A if our audience has questions for us outside of analytics or some of the other work we have that we showed off today.
I was curious about the split screen tool.
Mm-hmm.
And the needles you had there. What were they measuring exactly from each publisher?
Oh, the needles, let me bring up split screen, make sure I'm not telling tales out of school, but split screen tells us how many people in it. Well, actually, let me just back up. So split screen is based on a project that we run called Citizen Browser. And Citizen Browser answers a question I think we've all had, which is what are people seeing on Facebook, right? We intuitively know, like my Facebook news feed provides different things to me than yours does. And so we wanted to understand how that broke down on different demographic groups. So we convened a statistically representative sample of the across the United States, partnering with YouGov, a polling firm. And so they have a pool of people. Everyone in the pool downloads a browser that we call Citizen Browser. They log into it once, and through that, we get a snapshot of what they're seeing. In split screen, what we're showing are a couple of demographic slices that we have enough information for. So we have Biden voters and Trump voters. We have women and men. We have Black people and white people. And so the needle is sort of showing, okay, for how, what are the 640 Biden voter panelists seeing versus the 200 Trump voter panelists? And that's what the needle is sort of demonstrating.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And I'll say split screen is really fun to play around with. It's really interesting to see what's trending in any particular moment. So for example, as of literally today, for Biden voters, the hashtags that are trending on Facebook right now are Pride Month, Pride 2021, and Love is Love. For the panel of Trump voters, the hashtags that are trending right now are Green Bay Packers, Go Pack Go, Memorial Day. And so, it's like, it just adds heft to the belief of like, we are actually operating in different bubbles. And one dream we've had at times with split screen is this the type of tool that could be helpful for community or for organizations trying to understand their communities even better, right? Like, could you deploy something like split screen on a sample of the subscribers to your particular outlet, right? If they like, do you want to know what people are seeing and what's happening in their ecosystems? And if let's say you're a local paper, do you want to understand like what are actually those demographic factors? What's the difference in their news ecosystem? We have not yet rolled that out because it's pretty labor intensive and we only have so many engineers, but if that's something that's ever of interest to folks, we have been looking for local and community partners to experiment. So please I have a very creative email address of nabiha@themarkup.org. So if that's of interest to you or anything else that we've been talking about, please do give a shout, because we would love to be in conversation with the INN community on the journalistic tools we build and the business tools that we build. I think with that, we're almost near are we almost at time, Jeffrey? That's what my watch is telling me.
We have about 1.5 minutes left.
All right, in 90 seconds, does anyone have another question that we can answer for you about the markup and how we do what we do?
Are you working on anything that analyzes news publishers?
No. In what way? Analyzes like what news publishers are. Could you tell me a little bit more about what you have in mind?
There's just subtle differences in how the news is presented, whether you Fox News or CNN, and how that I think a lot of users don't pay attention to.
Yeah, it's a great question. We are not. I mean, I think Citizen Browser and Split Screen particularly can surface some of those things, right? So the idea is we can surface it and someone else can report on it. We're focusing, because of who we are, we focus on the platforms themselves and what they're amplifying. But that's certainly something that if someone else wanted to report on using a Split Screen, they absolutely could. All right, well, with that, I think we're at time. I see Jeffrey's note in the chat. Thank you, everyone. We've furiously been taking notes during this session. And so if you get an email from some of us, I hope you're comfortable with my collection of your first party data from the chat and you're willing, if you're interested in chatting with us or seeing how some of our work can apply and help you in your work, please do give us a shout and respond to our emails when we send you a note. But thank you very much.